the sophistication in the level and type of research that physical therapists are doing now is just so much more sophisticated than we were back then. And it's Pitt and Iowa and all the other universities that have done foundation work to advance the profession like we have. That makes the difference.
Hi, my name is Bill Boissonnault. On behalf of the Academy of Orthopedic Physical Therapy, I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us as we do a little time travel today. As many of you are aware, 2024 is the 50th anniversary of the Academy. It's a big birthday, and there's lots of activities, lots of events to not only celebrate and honor the past, but pivot to the next 50 years. There's going to be a historical timeline created on the website. But we're doing conversations like this to highlight some key events, and events not just help shape the academy, but the profession as a whole. And so today our travel is going to take us back to the mid to late 1990s. And the event itself was the Clinical Research Center for Work-Related Low Back Pain. We have three individuals joining me today to talk about this key event. First is Dr. Dan Riddle, who's the Otto D. Payton Professor of Physical Therapy at VCU College of Health Professions. And back in the mid to late 90s, Dan was the chair of the research committee on the board of directors for the section and really helped drive the research direction for the section at that point in our history. And we have two individuals who created the Clinical Research Center. Dr. Julie Fritz, distinguished professor, University of Utah in the College of Health, and Dr. Tony Delitto, who is the Dean of School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences at the University of Pittsburgh. So the three of you, thank you very much for joining me today. Dan, the first question is for you. You think it would be a no-brainer. Low back pain, an important research project, a topic germane to many of the section members, not only back in those days, but certainly still today. But the idea of giving almost $300,000 to the foundation, so turn the funding administration over to another entity, that's a lot of money for the section back in those days. And for the foundation, this was really their largest project to date. They had never taken on a project of this magnitude before. So in some ways, this was uncharted territory for the section as well as the foundation. So maybe you could give a little insight or background discussion that the board had regarding funding a project to this size, collaborating with the foundation at that point in time.
Sure. Bill, what year was that the foundation funded the CRC? And I could ask either Tony or Julie that question, but
I've got it. So 1996, the section made a pledge for 1996, 7, and 8. And that funding, the foundation needed to reach 80% of the $600,000 total to put out the RFP. And the funding that the section gave allowed them to reach that threshold.
Got it. Thank you. Memory's a little foggy from about 30 years ago, so I wasn't sure. My recollection is that there's a few things. First of all, I think the section realized how fortunate we were to have the economic wherewithal to support such a large effort. That's one thing. The second is that the research section gave input indicating that, number one, the research section wasn't prepared to oversee the review of the grants submitted for that. We just didn't have the economic resources or the science-based resources to do that, nor were we autonomous enough. And we tried to share all those issues with the executive committee, and they were very receptive about seeing the importance of making sure that the review panel that was going to oversee that CRC was truly a group that was not only well prepared to review that level of grant. At that time, the orthopedic section was not giving any research grants. To my recollection, we were simply sort of a depository for abstracts for combined sections meeting. That was our primary role, as well as advising about various research aspects in the section. But and I have a couple of stories about how far I think we've come when it comes to platform presentations at CSM, but we can get to that later if we have time. So I think it was the committee that really voiced the recommendation that the foundation be the house that does the review and does the administrative control and delivery of the resources that the orthopedic section was so willing to provide. So
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. That's what I understand, that this really was the first effort by the section to fund research, and certainly to this magnitude. And I think also one of the things that helped in terms of going to the foundation was that Alan Jetty was the person who was overseeing the administration of this grant, and Alan came with a lot of credibility. So I think that helped our discussion in terms of, yes, let's move into this direction.
as well as the external reviewers that the foundation recruited to review the proposals, I think was a real strength that the section didn't have.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Good, thank you.
sure.
Tony and Julie, in terms of the Clinical Research Center itself, maybe, Julie, if you want to start kind of what your roles were in the creation of this and administering this center, and what were the primary goals and objectives for the center?
Well, I can start, but Tony's certainly in a far better position to talk about the concept and the startup and what he was hoping to achieve, because I just happened to be around in the environment as a wannabe doctoral student, um, who was really quite naive to the backdrop of just what a big deal this kind of investment and commitment was, which probably um, helped me in terms of not feeling overwhelmed by the task at hand. But this for me, it was an opportunity to complete my PhD, to learn research, to try to understand and run a clinical trial in the way that we did it back then. And it was just an invaluable learning experience that I didn't understand in its complexity, not the complexity of what we were doing, but how it fit professionally with the emergence of research in the profession at the time. I was just trying to get a degree done.
And it worked. You did get your degree, correct?
That did work, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Tony?
I think I'll I'll go back to my role in the in the really was to try. I was started in the beginning soliciting support for the CRC before the application even came out. And I remember going as a member of the section on research. The foundation leaned on us, and the orthopedic section leaned on us to go to other sections and try to get matching funding for it and explain the whole idea of a clinical research center. So in a lot of ways, I felt, I was in on that sort of the groundwork. And then, of course, we were going to apply for it. And I had a previous experience applying for a clinical research center, the first that was funded by the foundation that the University of Iowa obtained. And so I had been through the process before, and conceptually, we had, we brought together it was very easy to come up with the aims for the trial. We had some secondary aims that went along with the primary aim. We had a great, obviously having Julie, she was just a tremendous team member to write this thing, put it in. We competed and we won it. We won the competition. And then in that category of be careful what you ask for, we had to deliver. And it wasn't an easy task at all. You learn very, very quickly that all of these promises you get from people beforehand, it really, in the implementation stage, you kind of have this. I learned this rule basically that if people are going to guarantee you a certain number of referrals for a study, you probably need to divide that by about 10%, and that's what you're going to get in terms of recruitment. So we were, we struggled initially recruiting. but in the long run, we finished the project. The project was a success, and I think not only did it get Julie her dissertation, but we put out a decent publication from it, and I think it did show the effectiveness of the approach that right now, when you look back on it, it was one of the early studies that built upon a whole range of low back pain research. And so I think, for that, it
Yeah.
was, I think it was almost like a seed, that really sprouted a lot of productive research in the area.
Yeah. So Tony, was part of the aim to develop a team of researchers? I mean, was it a clinical grant and or a research development grant, or did that just happen along with the process?
No, it happened with the process. I mean, the foundation was clearly interested in a trial to be done. I mean, that's what they didn't mandate that it be done by doctoral students or that it be a training component. We performed it that way because it was just logistically, it was the best way to do it. You can, if we were to hire staff, research staff, with knowing what I know now about it, we couldn't have afforded it. Honestly, it was, using doctoral students and having the doctoral students funded not by the project itself, but by internal funds. That was how we got it. That's how we got a lot of it going.
Tony, you mentioned the Iowa Clinical Research Center, so at least you had some model to look at. Were there any other models out there besides the Iowa CRC that you could, in terms of your fact-finding mission?
No, there were the only other sources we had were the people that were previously funded through the NIH, and there were just a few of those. So I remember leaning on Steve Wolf a little bit. I remember leaning on Alan a little. In fact, Alan was, if I'm not mistaken, I think we had Alan as part of our oversight board or something. So it was, we didn't really. I mean, pretty green. Pretty green.
Yeah, very good. So you had Julie as a wannabe doctoral student. Any other wannabe doctoral students that really had an important role in the CRC?
I think Julie was the start of us recruiting a number of doctoral students that if they weren't directly involved in the CRC, they were involved in the aftermath of it. So you had Greg Hicks, Steve George. Now again, some of these doctoral students came on board when we were finished with the study, but it was the study was really that CRC was really the base for us to build a doctoral program that produced quite a few very prolific researchers in PT.
Who had a huge impact in the profession over the years. Dan, maybe your perspective, what have you seen over the years that evolved from this CRC in terms of, Tony talked about planting seeds, from your vantage point, what do you see?
Well, I mean, I would echo Tony's point there about the payoff for a proposal that's funded in this way just begins with the work that directly is a result of that funding, the research paper or papers that come from that work. The big payoff is the line of doctoral students, highly funded researchers that follow just right in line from that work and building on that work. So it's the beginning of a great thing, and the beginning of a great thing happened at Iowa as well. And the string of great researchers who were trained based on some of this funding is really where the payoff is for the profession. Not so much the work directly, although the work directly is obviously important. It's the follow-up to all that work and all the training that has been done at these two universities in particular that the foundation should be very proud of.
Yeah.
I think if you look at it in terms of return on investment, the foundation always boasts about the return on investment for every dollar they've funded, they get a huge return. I don't know what that number is right now, but it's always been very, very high. I'd be curious to know just how much of that is the two CRCs that they funded.
Yeah.
I bet it's a large proportion, and it just shows that that's the best, in my mind, the best metric to look at the success of the CRCs is that return on investment from all of the researchers that came out of that, the base of that research. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's what we'll see in the next 10 to 15 years with Linda Resnick's work with foundation-funded health services work that will hopefully be as good a payoff as what Pitt in Iowa has had in the following decades. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Yep.
The structure that was built and the return on investment is undeniable, and it's one of the most important things that the foundation does is build scientific environments at institutions like Pitt. But I want to come back to what Tony said about the science itself, which, 30 years on or whatever we're at now, it's easy to look at the output of that, the study itself, and by today's standards, it really doesn't measure up. But for the time, it really, as I look back on it and what it built in terms of a scientific framework, was establishing some really important things in back pain research. At the time, the idea that you could treat patients based on a decision-making strategy that was really focused on achieving a patient-centered outcome and not a patho-anatomical mechanistic rationale was really controversial. And the treatment-based classification system that we were testing there was a real paradigm shift of decision-making in physical therapy for back pain. And I think it had knock-on effects in other areas. And so, doing that and also designing a study that was somewhat now what we would call more pragmatic, but at the time we were very much focused on isolating discrete treatments instead of studying decision-making. And these are things now that have really advanced quite a bit in our own physical therapy scientific discipline, as well as kind of in clinical research in general. But it was very paradigm shifting at the time.
Yeah. All three of you have mentioned kind of the longer term outcomes associated with the CRC. And Dan, the idea that the results of the research really was the beginning. That can be a tough sell to people who are not researchers and who are really watching the dollars. So whether you're talking about an academy or a chapter, and $600,000 is a lot of money. And so people so what are we going to get for this? And, you don't know until the work is done, but we certainly got a return on the investment with this particular CRC. And I think the success laid the groundwork for future section, commitments of large amounts of money to the foundation. And section has has its own grant funding model as well. So I think that's one of the outcomes of this CRC, the success that the section was willing and had the capability to do funding like this down the road. So maybe to wrap up, we'll go around the horn here. Any final thoughts about the CRC? Behind the scenes things that happen that people would never know just by reading the articles that came out of this. Tony, we'll start with you.
Oh my God, where do you start? I guess from a behind the scenes perspective, I found that what I had to do was maneuver in my institution in ways that I never thought was possible. The kinds of things we had to do, the constant struggle to recruit patients, to get people to just follow through on the simplest of promises, the arm twisting, the idea that it never stays fixed. We'd get people back on track. They'd start, referring a little bit more, and then it would fall apart again. And here I am thinking that it was fixed, but in a short time later, it wasn't. I had that was a whole new, revelation for me, in the sense that, is this what a scientist does? You know what I mean? Going in and reminding people of promises they made over and over and over again, and then just having to keep doing it. It was like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. You just continually do it over and over again. And, you know, so for me, it was, that I learned from that, and I learned from the second study we got funded, from that Julie was involved with that we ran into very similar things with the lumbar stenosis trial, and it got to the point where I took a step back and realized, we just have to do things differently around here, and now we have this, we've created this. For lack of better terms, it's this physical therapy clinical translational research center. It's run like a clinic, and it's funded in part by the CTSA, the clinical translational research initiatives that are out there, and really its sole function is recruitment. It's to grease the skids for recruitment for studies that we do around here all the time. And suffice to say, we just haven't had that kind of trouble with recruitment since then. But it's because we put this huge infrastructure in place to take care of it. It's not that everything's easy, but that was one part of it that now that took about 10 years for us to find that kind of a solution. But when I look back on it, we under recruited for the study. We didn't reach what the numbers that we promised to reach. We still got a credible study out of it, but it wasn't the numbers we wanted to reach. But I'm absolutely surprised we did what we did, given that we were doing it. I know $600,000 sounds like a lot of money. It really does. But it wasn't money that was dedicated to that recruitment process. It was money that was dedicated to people. And our own naivete that really, so for me, I look back on it. There were a lot of things we learned, from it. And Julie did a yeoman's job of the parts that she did in it. And here I am just still running around like a chicken with my head cut off to get, on top. It was, but you know what? I never recalled it. It was. I look back on it. I look back on it very fondly. I don't look back on it as a nightmare.
Yeah, good. It sounds like painting the Golden Gate Bridge might be easier than what you're describing.
More predictable, anyway.
Yeah, it was certainly more predictable, for sure. Julie, how about you?
The enduring lesson that I still think about from that trial was a friend and colleague of mine who was treating the usual care patients. And I had to talk her down several times because those people kept getting better. And it was a strong lesson to me of questioning my own presumptions about what works and why people actually get better. And, I think that it made me question a lot of presumptions that I walked into that trial with that still really, I think, inform the types of questions that I'm most interested in asking.
Very good. Dan?
I would say that the enduring lesson of the CRC funding really relates to the numbers of PTs who've been NIH funded at that time versus the numbers of PTs who are NIH funded now, numbers of PTs who are serving on study sections now versus then, and so on. And I can't help but think that the foundation and the CRC funding had such an integral role in determining that exponential growth in the numbers funded and the numbers serving on study sections. It just came at the perfect time for the association to really blossom on a research perspective, really become sophisticated in research. And the CRCs really sort of laid the groundwork for that effort, I think. I think back to small things like a couple of things I want to share with you that I maybe have told both Tony and Julie before. But back in the day, we used to only do platform presentations at CSM, the standard 10 to 15 minute presentation, 5 minutes of questions. And a couple of them stand out so much as, look where we've come from. And one of them was Rich Gadasek, God bless him, he's deceased now, presented on a stretch weakness study that he did, of which he did several. And Florence Kendall was in the back row of the room. And Rich gave his presentation and, of course, provided data to question the theory of stretch weakness. And I was kind of watching Florence out of the corner of my eye, and she stood up and raised her hand. And Rich was, very gentlemanly. Yes, Miss Kendall, you have a question. And she proceeded to stand up and just talk. And she took a few steps closer to the aisle, kept talking, no question, just kept talking about stretch weakness. Got into the aisle, kept talking, checked my watch. We're 2 minutes into the 5-minute question and answer. She takes a few steps closer to where Rich is standing at the podium, a few more steps closer, finally, toe to toe with Rich, talking to Rich about stretch weakness. And Rich did something I just will never forget it. He leans into the mic and says, Miss Kendall, would you like to speak into the microphone? And she looks at him and she says, no, I'm done, and goes back and sits down. I thought that was just so precious. And the other one that I think is a sort of symbolic of how far we've come as a profession since the 90s. Uh, we were in Las Vegas, and the room demand was so high that they put the platform presentations in the hallway. So we were in hallways with these little dividers, 6-foot dividers between the two areas, so we could clearly hear each other. And Paul Beatty was chairing the session behind me. And I was a bit concerned when I saw the next presenter, and I'm not going to mention who it was. I don't even remember who it was, but it was a study that was done to examine the effect of aerobics on low back pain in industry. And I was a little concerned because as she steps up to the mic at the podium, and this was actually a stage, elevated area, she had a boombox in her hand. And I thought, what is going on here? So she steps up and she gives her talk. And just a few minutes left, she says, now I'm going to demonstrate the aerobics I did. And she presses the button on the boombox and it's blasting this aerobics music. And she's up there doing this. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what is going on here? And I look back and Paul Beatty is standing at the door saying, what the hell is going on? So I walk up to the I realized, oh my gosh, we completely lost control. So I walk up, hit the off button on the boombox and said, I'm sorry, but you're done. And that was it. But that is just so symbolic of where we were in the 90s. And the sophistication in the level and type of research that physical therapists are doing now is just so much more sophisticated than we were back then. And it's Pitt and Iowa and all the other universities that have done foundation work to advance the profession like we have. That makes the difference.
Yeah, it's good to hear we've made some progress. That's encouraging. All the illustrations, examples you just gave, just again illustrate what a game changer this clinical research center was for the profession. And as I mentioned before, the orthopedic section as well. I mean, it gave the orthopedic section confidence in future years to, fund their own research and make major contributions to the foundation. And it really hinged on the success of this particular CRC. So on behalf of the Academy, I want to thank the three of you for your roles back then with the Clinical Research Center, and certainly what you've done for the profession since then. So thank you.
Well, thanks to the ortho section, really. That was risky, and they took the risk, and we all appreciate it.